Hey there, thanks for watching. Today I'm going to do, I guess, part two of a previous tutorial that I had done. Um, in the last one, I showed you how to use the surface deformer to have one object kind of flow along the surface of another object, like this. A lot of good uses for this, but what I wanted to figure out was how to make this thing, instead of just flow along in a straight line, how to make it follow a path. And to be honest, I wasn't able to figure out any easy method of doing it, but what I'm going to show you is what I came up with. So it'll probably be kind of quick, but it's not the most straightforward method. So if anybody figures out a better way or a cleaner way of doing this, then definitely put it in the comments. So let me close out of this one. And I'm going to put together something like this to where it's following a path. So let me just close that out. Alright, so just like in the last tutorial, starting with a real basic landscape, I'm going to change my view to the top view, and I'm going to create a cubic spline. So nothing too fancy there. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna back out of this so that I can put in a few more points, because when we go to kind of control the spline along the surface, it's going to be a lot easier with some more points in here. So let me take this spline, going to create a copy of it, and the next this one, we're in point mode, so this next one, really all I'm going to do is just move these points to the side a little bit. And I'm doing these points individually because I want them to be coming straight away from this original spline. And that'll make more sense in just a minute when I show you how we're going to use this to create this path. Alright, not perfect, but obviously you could spend a lot more time on that. So I'm going to highlight both of these. I'm going to raise them up to where it's above the surface here, above the landscape. Now with both of these selected again, we're going to do Mesh, Spline, Project. And the mode is XZ plane. Going to do Apply. And you'll see what that did is it took that spline and it projected it downward along this XZ plane, and it basically now it follows the contour of that landscape. Now what we're going to do is create a sweep along this to create a path that this other object is going to follow. So first thing I need to do is, actually, let me just create a rectangle. Scale that way down. And then let's grab the sweep nurb. Rectangle goes in there. Now if we take the second spline that we created, I believe it's called it'll be a rail spline, and if we put that here in the same structure, now if we go back to point mode, as we grab these, this is how we're going to make sure that the spline is just kind of hugging this contour along its entire path. So, for example, here, we're going to come up just a little bit. Way up there. Now, obviously, remember how I mentioned the more points you have in here, the more control you have over this, and you can really have it just hug this contour. But then again, the more points you have, the harder it is to get it set up in the first place. So, for something like this where I'm just playing around, I don't need to be very terribly clean with it. Oops. Now we'll do the same thing with this other, with the first spline. Obviously, I could be spending a whole lot more time on this. All right, so for demonstration purposes, that's good enough, I think. So next thing we need to do is take whatever little object that we've created. For example, with this, let me turn off this surface deformer. So here's a little cube that I created. So I created a cube, moved some of the points out. So a very basic kind of shape that I created. Put it into a subdivision surface here. Added a surface deformer. And the surface deformer, actually, you know what? Let me get out of that so I can show you from scratch. So we're gonna take this surface deformer, which is here, drag it into that cube, change this, and I don't know the secret here. What I typically do is play around with this until I get it to look right. One step that I failed to do is assign this to a surface. So within the surface deformer, you have to define the surface. We of course wanted to run along this sweep that we just created, so we'll take that and throw it in, and magically now it's now been deformed along the surface. So here's where the playing around comes in. Scaling everything until we get it to look the way that we want it to. So, all right. Obviously, you can play around with this forever until you make this thing look as good as you possibly can. But all you need to do now to animate it is animate it along this path, or animate the V setting here. So if we, for example, let's set the camera here, back out just a little bit. At 0, let's set the keyframe here. I forgot to mention too, you can toy around with this as well to make sure that it's in the middle of this path. You definitely want to hide it there, so it's going to be following this along this path. But of course, if that's hidden, it looks like it's running along the landscape here. So at 0, this keyframe is set, and let's move this out to there and pull this along. Set that keyframe, and there it goes. Now here's an obvious challenge. See how it's cutting through right there? Well, you know that's because in the sweep here, we need to find a point I want to bring that up, bring this up. Actually, highlight those 2 points, create a point, we added that point there. Now we can bring that up just a little bit, back to the other spline. Same deal over here. Create point, put it somewhere in here. Bring that up. Now if we hide this again, as this rolls through, now it kind of hugs the surface a little bit better. Now of course you could animate the camera, have the camera follow along, anything else that you wanted to do, but for this demonstration, let's go with this. So under render settings, let's say we're going to go from frame 0 to frame 70. I've already got it, the output, the file path set. Let's bring this down a little bit to speed it up. Let's do 960. One thing just to point out, this looks a ton better with ambient occlusion on. Just to demonstrate real quickly, there's with ambient occlusion, there's without. So obviously, because it's running along the surface, so that contact area is going to look a lot better with ambient occlusion turned on. So now if I do file save, we launch the render here. Obviously, for a real project, I would be setting up the textures and so forth a lot better. So let me hit pause here, and I'll come back when this is rendered out and let you see how it looks. Alright, the render is completed, so let me show you what the final product is. Obviously, kind of an issue there with the surface that I created was a little bit higher here, so see that? Although that could be the effect you're looking for if you want it to look like it's flying and if it's something running down a ski slope, for example. It might be flying off the hill at times. So let's run this through again. So yeah, I think it's a really it's a cool deformer. The key though is, I would say for for a real project, probably definitely load up a whole lot more of these points on here. Definitely, as you're creating the second spline, don't just don't make a copy and move the whole thing over, because the points from here to there aren't really lined up, if you know what I mean. They might be running from here to there or from here to there, which when you go to use the second spline as a rail and you're moving it up and down, in my experience, it causes issues with the length of the object. It kind of gets deformed in ways that aren't very predictable. So if you add more points in here, the setup time is a little bit more lengthy, I guess, but I'm sure it'll pay off. And then once that's done, then just spending a bit of time just playing around in here, figuring out which of these axes you're going to have to use to animate. The other one will help you line it up on that path that you've created, and then spending a little bit of time here on the scale in the X, Y, and the Z to get this thing to be the length and width that you want it, and also to make sure that it's not too high or too low. You can also play around with the strength. I found in this case it didn't, obviously has an effect that you're not looking for. So that's it for now. I appreciate you watching. If you like this, please do hit like, please share, go ahead and follow me if you wish, and I hope to put out more tutorials soon. Thank you.